Okay, so here we are. Welcome to the October 13th school board work session. We're going to cover safety and security tonight. And the work session portion of board meetings is just an opportunity for dialogue and discussion related to the topic at hand. It's not a session that requires action or voting or anything of that nature. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Cordy.
Okay, thank you. So as Chair Hecker noted, the topic for this evening is safety and security. And so this is one of the work sessions that we've designed in response to the board's ask around the history on key topics within the district and the background information. And so that's the primary objective. And so presenting tonight and answering your questions along the way are Jim Rose, Chief Operations Officer, and Ken Bell, Director of Facilities and Operations.
Thank you, Dr. Cordy. Good evening, Chair Hecker, members of the board. It's my pleasure to be here tonight, talk about safety and security, something that's quite important to our district and that we frankly have put quite a bit of effort into over the last number of years as part of the bond work, as well as outside of the bond work, to make sure that we're providing safe and secure locations for our students. There we go. We're going to cover just a few topics here this evening, including a little bit about the history, our systems, our buildings, and then talking also about our training. Really with the history, we're going to start with the 2016 capital bond. And the folks that put that bond together had a lot of foresight and actually put money aside specifically for safety and security. And so that gave us the opportunity to do some things during the bond process that really did improve our structures, improved the safety of our students. We needed a point to start from, though. And so we actually called together what we called our Safety and Security Summit. And we invited our first responders from Washington County, including Sherwood PD and Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue. We had our architects in the room, as well as Cornerstone Management, who was the owner's rep at the time. So that was the company that came alongside us and had guided us through the whole bond process. Rick Raynone is a name you may have heard, Casey Cunningham. Those are a couple of the people that were key to that work. And so they sat at the tables with us. We actually met at the Ridges in June of 2017 in the community room and had quite a long conversation about what are the safety and security needs within our district. And one key outcome from that was frankly very surprising was just how difficult our first responders found it to communicate within the buildings. And so we immediately got to work installing a distributed antenna system, also known as we call it DAS for short. And what a DAS is, it's a system basically to boost signals within a space or within a building, and thereby improving the voice and data connectivity for users. And so we found that our first responders, our Sherwood Police Department, when they came through the doors in certain buildings, they really struggled to communicate with their dispatch using their radios. And so by installing a boost system for their radio frequencies, they could travel throughout our buildings and actually have good communication to and from each other and to and from the main offices and dispatch. They also really like to be able to use their cell phones when they're in our spaces because they will text their peers. They will text pictures to and from each other as they're having their conversations, as they're doing their work within our buildings. And so we installed a cellular boost system as well. And so our first responders can now utilize those devices throughout all of our buildings. The side benefit of that is we also have better access to our own cell phone use in those spaces. And please, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to stop me. Another area that we spent quite a bit of time and effort on is what we call the security trio. And it's really three pieces that make our buildings more safe and secure. One is simply what we call access control. And so these are the badges that all your staff members have to get in and out of spaces and in and out of buildings. It allows us to do scheduled access. And so we can have different buildings open at different times to different users. The second piece is intrusion detection. And so this is really what alerts us if there's a break-in at night or activity that we don't want in the building at night. And then the final piece is video surveillance. And this is really to monitor our common spaces, the cafeterias, the gyms, halls, those kinds of spaces. To give you an example, at the high school, we have more than 70 external doors on the new building. And that just creates lots of spaces that we need to watch. And so we have about 130 cameras in and around that building that give us kind of eyes on our doors, our parking lots, our hallways, all of those spaces. And then at the middle school also, we have about 116 cameras throughout those spaces. All of our buildings have the cameras. And so there's certain members of our staff that have access to those. And so actually from my office, I can watch and see what's going on in different buildings if needed. I can just see what's going on at the bus drop off, those kinds of things. If we know there's something happening, we have the ability to look. The access to that, to the video surveillance in particular, is really limited to administrators, our campus monitors, and when we have one identified, our school resource officer. The other big upgrade we made was to our radio systems. Previously, we had kind of a disparate group of radios. Some were analog, some were digital. They didn't communicate well. There was no way to communicate really across the entire district utilizing handheld radio devices. And so we need these for a couple of reasons. One is just recess, and you have teachers and staff out on the playgrounds with kids. You'd like them to be able to communicate to staff in the office. Just general in-building communication, so between our custodians and office staff again, or at sporting events. You'll find that Friday night at the football game, many of your administrators will be there, they'll have their radios, and that's how they do a lot of the communication. And then of course, during emergencies. And the great thing about this new radio system is it actually works across the district in an emergency. So every building has its own radio channel, but there's also an emergency channel. And so we know if, like this morning, we had a lockdown drill at one of our elementary schools. Because of our protocols that we've put in place, they know to go in and say on the radio, on the emergency channel, that a drill is taking place. And then everybody across the district knows that's happening, which is really helpful. In the event of a real emergency, we'd want to be able to make sure we have those communications between buildings, between the district office, those kinds of things. And then every building has a base station, which has a kind of stronger antenna. It doesn't quite reach their channels across the entire district, except for that emergency one, but it does reach kind of building to building in a web. And so, for example, Middleton and the high school could communicate using their base stations. So. We also spent some time upgrading our transportation systems, including a new radio system for them as well, similar to the one we have in the buildings, but it's actually part of a larger network. And what that network gives us is the ability to communicate outside of our own little community. The old radio systems worked basically within the city limits and a little bit up into the hills, but we had a lot of spots where our own transportation department couldn't reach our buses. With the new system, we can communicate throughout our whole district, as well as nearby districts, and really most of the places our buses will go on field trips and athletic trips. So if our buses are in Bend, that radio network actually works and we can communicate directly with them. The other addition that we made was to add GPS units to all of our buses. And the advantage to that is one, we can, from that lower left picture you can see, we can actually see where on a map our buses are. And so if we have a bus who might be on a field trip and trying to get to OMSI and the road's blocked, our routers and dispatchers can jump on the radio and actually walk them through maybe what direction to take instead of the previously planned route, so they can get around that traffic or that construction that may be impeding them. The other nice thing is, for those of us that are parents, it gives us the ability to use the Ride 360 app that tells us where our bus is. And so I can look on the map and see that my kids are not quite home yet. They're just down the street on Roy Rogers, that kind of thing, which is kind of comforting for those of us that like to do that. The other upgrade we made at many of our buildings related to safety and security is actually our fire systems. And we had systems that were old, needed repair, and needed updating. We've brought all of our fire panels up to standards. And so you get not only the strobe light to alert folks of any emergency related to fire, as well as the sound. So that's very helpful. And then for our buildings that didn't previously have a sprinkler system, including Hopkins that we're sitting in, we've been able to install sprinklers. So that picture on the right is actually from the multi-purpose room and is some of the kind of exposed plumbing that we did to make sure that we had sprinklers throughout that space. So another area that was identified early in the bond planning process was seismic work. And really the need to improve our seismic resiliency, knowing that we had some older buildings. In 2017, there's a couple of you that may remember, we had a long conversation with our owner's rep and the architects, and we brought in a couple of engineers who expertise is in seismic work. And we talked a lot about the occupancy levels and what was it that we wanted our buildings to be able to do in the event of a seismic earthquake or seismic event, excuse me. Not just for our existing buildings, but also for the new high school. And we had all our buildings assessed using the FEMA assessment known as rapid visual screening. And it was determined that 4 of our buildings needed some work. You can see them listed here. And those improvements would be to reach the life safety standard, which basically means that the structure will stay intact and we can evacuate people out safely. The scope of work to reach a higher level of occupancy was not in the original bond and therefore was kind of out of our reach. It was out of our reach in terms of available resources. And so we went ahead and moved forward with the life safety. A lot of that work was attaching roofs to walls, adding additional X braces to structures, and then completing some heating, ventilation, and air conditioning work that really tied those systems down so that way they wouldn't move in the event of an earthquake. I do want to talk about the high school because that is an area where we did make the expenditure and it was planned kind of from the beginning to meet that higher standard of immediate occupancy. And so what that really means is that while we might have to come in and do some cleanup and some minor repairs, the physical structure is sound enough that after an earthquake, we could come back in and use it. And we could use it, potentially for classes, but also just as a resource for our community. And that's one of those that we had long discussions about, do you do just the commons area? Do you do just the gym? In the end, the entire building, all 353,000 square feet of it, was designed to that higher level. So that's truly an asset for our district in the event we have a seismic event. And with that, I'm actually going to hand it off to Mr. Bell here
Can
to
I ask you
cover.
a
Oh,
question?
certainly.
Sorry. For the seismic, so for the schools that aren't, so besides the high school, to what size or earthquake are we talking? Like,
That
what
isn't
is the standard, the base?
That is an excellent question. And I don't recall to what level that is. I would have to look that up and get back to you.
Okay.
Sorry
I
about
would
that.
love to know.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Just California. That's Californian. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. One of the things that we were able to add as part of that bond was putting in secure entry vestibules in all of our schools. We had it at the ridges at the time on both sides, of both the Laurel and Edie side, but none of our other schools did we have a secure entry vestibule. And what that means is you create an entry that forces visitors as they enter the school to go through the main office, which cuts down significantly on the number of people inside your school that you don't know about, that haven't checked in, that shouldn't be there. It requires obviously the doors to be locked. So for example, if we use our new high school as an example, you can come in those front doors during the morning at 8 o'clock, the second set of doors locked. You can only come in the first set of doors and it forces you into the main office. And then the same thing, it'll open up at lunch so kids can come and go there. Then as soon as lunch is over, those doors lock. And that's kind of how it works at each of our schools. And since we went to this a couple of years ago, we have seen a significant decrease in the number of people inside our schools. that are not supposed to be there. And so this has had a really positive impact on doing that and keeping control. And you combine the secure entry vestibule with our camera systems, and you have a really secure school where the school personnel is aware of who is inside their building. So this has been a huge addition.
I was going to ask this earlier, but you reminded me just now. Is there somebody that's monitoring these security cameras in each school, like on a consistent basis, or is it just when there's an incident? What happens with those?
So it varies a little bit by level and by what's going on. So typically, no, there's not someone whose full-time job it is to monitor these. For the most part, it's used as to go back and look at when there's been incidences, thefts, things like that. At some schools, they will have people assigned to look at it like during recess and monitor things during recess. The front entry vestibule and the front entry is typically up on a flat screen in all of our main offices, visible by both our secretary and our admin assistant, so that they can keep an eye on that as well in case there's something that comes to the front door that we should be alarmed about. And they have fobs and things that can initiate our lockdown system from their desk. And so that's part of that. At the high school, the campus monitors do some monitoring during the day of key spaces like the commons and some things like that when they're in their offices. So they have those cameras up on their computers regularly and are monitoring it. So it kind of varies, but for the most part, it's used after the fact or for initial entry into the school at those key entrances. The other thing is in all of our main offices, we're allowed to put about 8 screens up onto the one screen. So it's an 8-box screen. And so what we've done is put the 8 most hot, whatever you want to call them, most likely to have an incident. Either it's the commons or it's entrances or back entrances where kids might let people in. So those are typically the ones that are up there all the time, visible to everyone. So any other questions about secure entry? We haven't talked about it. I mean, in just between the middle and high school, it's about 250 cameras. So to monitor that many, you'd have at the high school, you'd have to have more than one person if you're going to monitor all of them at once. Middle school, same thing, probably more than one. The elementary level, you could have one person because typically they have somewhere between 30, 40 cameras at those, which is possible to put on 2 or 3 screens and flip back and forth. But we have never talked about doing that in a full-time capacity. The second thing is the standard response protocol, and we tend to refer to this as the SRP. This is the standard response protocol is a common language that we have adopted along with all of the other agencies in Washington County in order to ensure that we're all speaking the same language in an emergency. And so the standard response protocol was developed by a foundation called the I Love You Guys Foundation that was enacted to deal when school shootings became something to worry about, and the increase in school violence. And so this was started by a dad of a student who lost their life in a school shooting, and has been his life's work since then. And he's worked with agencies all over the nation to develop this. And this is the most common protocol used all over. But for us, it's important that we use the same thing the rest of Washington County does. The reason is in the event of an emergency, let's say that we did go into an actual real lockdown, we're going to have somewhere between 8 and 20 agencies respond immediately. Any school violence situation is going to be the #1 code, and they're going to all respond from everyone who's within about 25 miles. And so it's important that when those officers arrive and when our other first responders arrive, that we're all speaking the same language and that we're all saying that mean the same thing when we say things. And so we adopted this about 10 years ago, the standard response protocol, and we use it for all of our training, for all of our emergencies. That poster that you see up here on the screen is up in all of our schools. It's in every classroom and it's in every space where students gather. So whether it be the gym, the commons, the music room, auditorium, things like that. So it's in every space where students gather. We train out with this. All of our schools, all of our staff and students have been trained out with this at the beginning of the year. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about drills in our next slide under emergency preparedness. But these emergency actions are the terms. And you may notice if you've seen this before that these have changed. Last year, They used to use the term lock out to determine things that happened outside of your building, but that created a lot of confusion, lock down, lock out. And so they have changed the language. And Washington County, it actually changed 2 years ago with I love you guys, but Washington County waited a year to adopt it with the pandemic. So this is the first year that we've trained out. Instead of lock out, we now have hold and secure, which are two different actions. Secure is very much similar to what we used to consider a lockout. And hold is just keeping you in your space while we figure out what the situation is. Could just be a visitor that we lost track of in the building or those kinds of things. And this is something that we have put a lot of time and energy into the training throughout our district with our staff, with our students. And from when we started doing this about 8 or 9 years ago to where we are now, we have come a long ways. We are well prepared for emergencies, and it's because we put a lot of time and energy and focus into training this out with our students and staff. The Emergency Preparedness Committee was something that we created in 2013, again, to sort of deal with this issue of not only school violence, but all of the other emergencies. What we realized is we started to look around and say we sort of had different things going on in different buildings in terms of how prepared we were for emergencies and how well things were trained out. And we really needed a uniform approach to that as a district, both from like a handbook perspective, but also then how we trained it out. And more importantly, do we do the drills and do we hold people accountable to doing those drills and making sure that they're done in the same way? So this committee was formed in 2013 and is made up of representatives from each of the 3 school levels, as well as all district departments, including the Sherwood Police Department, which has multiple members on it. This group went to the National FEMA training in 2014 and spent a week with all of the experts helping us develop plans for all of our schools for every emergency. And so we have plans that we train out with all of our staff that's been developed with top FEMA representatives. And then this group, the EPC or Emergency Preparedness Committee, plans out those drills and then creates accountability within them. And the accountability is really important because it's easy to get busy and to forget about things or to not think about things. And so this group does a great job of reminding schools. We have spreadsheet where we track every school's drills and we go and observe. So today we had a lockdown drill at Hawksview Elementary and we had 7 administrators there from 5 different buildings who observed the drill, check doors, check protocols, and then we meet afterwards and provide feedback to the principal as well as to myself as facilities. Because like, for example, at Hawksview, we had a roll-up door that didn't come down. So that would be something that I dealt with this afternoon with our security company and made sure that door was brought online so that it would close appropriately. And so, which is exactly why we do these drills and exactly why we meet afterwards to give that feedback so we can make those improvements. Another example is there was a situation where I was going into the gym today and I saw a class, the PE class, kind of going into a locker room area, and I found that the locker room was unlocked. And so we talked about keeping that door locked but propped open so it's easier for them to secure themselves in the event of an emergency. So it's just things like that, little pieces that can really help in terms of keeping kids safe. The drills that we do a fire drill monthly, we do an earthquake drill twice a year, and then we do a lockdown or a secure drill 3 times a year, 1 each trimester. And we start out the year with those being well announced and everyone knows when they are, students, staff, announce it to parents when those will be, et cetera. And then as we go throughout the year, we raise the difficulty and we give less notice. In the last one of the year, typically we won't maybe not tell anyone except the principal. They may be the only person that knows it's going to be. It's just to raise that difficulty. And so people, because otherwise people tend to prepare for the drill and which sometimes takes some of the difficulty out.
Just one thing I want to add. It's impressive because the district's been doing this for years and I've been able to be in a couple of the drills. And I will tell you, that is one of the most powerful things you could ever be involved in. To be in a school and to be, pulling on doors, knowing there are children that are quietly sitting behind there is absolutely excruciating, even though it's not real. But what is amazing is that every door is checked, every single thing is checked and identified. And in years past, and I'm sure they still are, it's a debrief, not just with
the school district, but it's with TV, FNR, it's with the police, and learning everybody's perspective on how do we get the good guys in, keep the bad guys out, how do we keep the kids safe? It's it's an awful discussion, but it has to happen, and it is amazing to have all of that input and to know that we have to put the time in, and the district's doing that to keep kids and staff and everybody as safe as possible. But it is a collaborative, really amazing approach. If you ever are invited to do that, I would definitely say go do that. It is really something. So thank you for all that work.
Yeah, seeing a high school with 1,700 students and 200 staff members silent for 15 minutes is kind of eerie, but shows that they could be well prepared in the event of some type of emergency. The last thing that the EPC does is they have created go bags for each school. And this bag contains all of the resources that the front office would need in the event that they had to leave the school. So in the event that there was an evacuation and they had to leave, it also prepares them for the likelihood that there's no Wi-Fi and no cell service. And so they have all of their emergency contact information, all of their health medical protocols are printed and updated every trimester and put into those bags so that they have it. In those bags, it contains smaller bags that are our emergency response teams. And in that, you'd pull out a bag and it would have a clipboard. That clipboard would have a checklist. So we have teams that we train for that, but it's also set up so that you don't have to be trained. You could just I could be Jim Rose, here you go. And I'd hand him the clipboard. You're in charge of the first aid group. And he'd just start going down the list. Okay, pull out all the resources, and so you just follow the checklist, and it allows us to, in an immediate situation, mobilize an emergency response team made up of staff members that may not have a lot of training, but they have all the resources and they have a checklist that they can follow step by step. And what we found is even when we train people in the emergency, they forget all the steps anyway. And so the checklist is enormously valuable for that. And some examples of that, we have a first aid, a search and rescue team, student parent reunification. And this is something that we have mocked up internally quite a bit on, because that's one of the most difficult things to do is in the event of a mass evacuation, how do you then reunite students with their families? And so we have, I wouldn't want to reveal all of those details, but I will tell you that we have deals with local retailers, et cetera, to take over spaces that would allow us to shelter our students safely and then create processes in large parking lots and things like that to reunify students with their parents. And so we have a lot of those plans in place, or we have all of those plans in place and update those yearly. So what's that? Yes, and the base station radios tie into that whole system with those. Right, and the last group about training is the District Safety Committee. This committee meets monthly and their main purpose is to report, examine, and solve district safety concerns. So the group is made up of 2 members from each building, not just each school, but our other buildings as well, like SIPOL. And they have 1 classified and 1 certified member from each building. This group meets monthly and we do a number of things. One, we'll examine the district accident report and look at what kind of injuries and accidents have occurred within the district, both students and staff. We'll look at any concerns that folks bring in their building. So I'll give you an example of one. So we had multiple people get injured at the front entrance to the high school last year because they walked into the large windows next to the entry door thinking that it was an open space. We had a UPS driver who got a concussion. I don't mean to laugh, but it's beautiful and it's huge, beautiful windows. And so the way that we responded to that is we worked with our own engineering department to develop these small Bowman stickers and put them in the middle at just below eye level for each person, just to protect that. And we had actually had 3 different people injured running into the windows right at the front door of the office. And so that's kind of an example. The cart that you see in the picture is another response. We had 3 years ago, we had a number of back injuries from staff, and a lot of them were carrying things out to their cars or carrying things of paper to their classroom. And so we purchased 2 of these carts for each school, and they're stored in the staff room at each school, and they can grab them anytime they need to move things around just to create safety and a safer way to move things around. The other thing that this committee has done for us is the RSSL requires us to have a group of staff members that meet and can bring any COVID related protocol concerns. And so this group was that reporting or still is that reporting mechanism for that rule. And so this group can bring concerns about COVID protocols, and this group can address them, come up with solutions, and work with building administrators to solve them. We take any other questions or comments that you have?
I just have one quick comment for you guys. I remember when my oldest started school at Archer Glen being very concerned about safety and people coming in and out and having so many conversations back then with Mr. Wilmuth about all of that. So to see the safety vestibules come into place was so important to me, and I was so grateful to see it. And I've seen over the years little snapshots of how these drills take place, whether I've been volunteering or helping out with different kids on projects at the school. And our teachers have come such a long way in performing the drills. In fact, just today, when you guys said that, my son goes to Hawksview, and I thought, oh, he didn't come home and even say one word to me about the fact that they had that drill today. It didn't impact him in that way, even though we know you guys are doing such important work to secure their safety. They do it in such a way that most kids really aren't overly rattled by that process. And so I think that really speaks volumes to the work you guys are doing and how much time you guys have put into it. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say that this was such an important part of the bond for us to be able to get every school in the district, no matter its age, up to a consistent standard of frankly excellence in terms of the ability to monitor without it being without it feeling like students couldn't be kids. That it's I think we've created the right balance of making sure that we're able to monitor, we're able to see, and it doesn't feel like a police state either. It's that right balance because safety is so important, and we have these 5,000 very precious lives in our charge every day, and making sure that they're safe. And I just likewise feel like the standard has improved really dramatically over the last few years, and just really thankful to the voters for making the investment in safety and security, because I think being able to have the same ability to see a parking lot at the Ridges as we can see it at Archer and all of the upper schools as well, I think makes just a huge difference in our ability to keep track of who's supposed to be there and when, and also reduces the potential for property to get harmed when people aren't necessarily supposed to be on site. All of those things I think are very positive and keep us headed down the right track. So thanks for the work.
Thank you so much. That was great information. I appreciate it. And with that, I guess we will adjourn, and we'll be back at